So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you kindly for being here tonight. We are gathered here to discuss the book Genesis, Miracles and Predictions According to Spiritism. But before we start addressing the book itself, I would like to contextualize the importance of this book by addressing the other 4 books of the codification that preceded Genesis. I would also like to remind everyone that the Spiritist doctrine is based on science, religion, and philosophy all together, not one or the other, or more of one or the other, but all 3 are equally important. The other thing I would like to mention right away is with respect to Allan Kardec. I'll be saying that Allan Kardec wrote this or that, but we very well know that Allan Kardec put together the questions that were later answered by the spiritual benefactors, the high order spirits, the Spirit of Truth, and then Allan Kardec systematized, organized these questions into the 5 books of the codification. Having said all this, we start with the first book of the codification, the Spirit's book. And in the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec wrote or laid out the philosophical foundation of the Spiritist doctrine. It is the first book, so it makes sense that he would talk about the foundation of the doctrine itself. This book was then succeeded by the Medium's book. And in the Medium's book, Allan Kardec also laid out the foundation, the philosophical foundation, but here it's the philosophical foundation of our interexistence. But what is this? What is interexistence? We, the spirits, we manifest ourselves in 2 different realms. The physical realm, that we are very well acquainted with, and the spiritual realm, which right now seems a little abstract to some of us. But nevertheless, we do manifest ourselves in both realms, not in one or another exclusively, but we're always manifesting ourselves in both realms. Sometimes more in one than in the other, but we still have our manifestations divided into both of them. Hence the term inter and existence. After the Medium's book, we have the Gospel according to Spiritism. Here, most people believe that the Gospel is the religious part of the doctrine. It is true that the Gospel actually has the largest portion of the religiosity of the Spiritist doctrine. However, the idea of the Gospel is not to be or just to cover the religious aspects of it. The Gospel is actually a book that should be read together with the Spirit's book. These 2 books make a pair of books. And if you allow me a very simple analogy, it is like the Spirit's book represents the technical manual where you see the concepts, you see the theoretical foundation, and then you see all this applied in our daily lives through the examples of our Master Jesus Christ in the Gospel. So the Gospel plays the role as the user's manual. So we now see Spirit's book, the technical manual, and the Gospel as the user's manual. After the Gospel, we have heaven and hell. And the very first thing that we see in heaven and hell is the demystification of the presence or the creation of specific localities that we would either call heaven or hell. The idea of a heaven or a hell is in our mind. We are going to create that idea of heaven or hell depending on what we do today, on what we say today, on what we think today. So our words, our thoughts, and our actions today are building the heaven or the hell that we are going to find later on. It's not that there is a place already prepared for us. But there is something even more important for heaven and hell. Once again, if we extend that analogy, we have another pair of books. We have the Medium's book now, and we have heaven and hell. All the theoretical foundation, the philosophical foundation that we see about our interexistence is now exactly explained, exemplified with daily examples, simple examples, in heaven and hell, which then plays the role of the user's manual. So now, as you can see, we have 2 pairs of books. Spirit's book, technical manual, the Gospel, the User's Manual, and then Medium's Book, Technical Manual, and Heaven and Hell, the User's Manual. And we ask ourselves, do we need a fifth book? Do we need another pair of books? Do we need 3, 4, 5 more books? What we know is that the high order spirits, and the Spirit of Truth in particular, they are very frugal with their words. They are not going to give us too many words. They are going to give us enough for us to work on, and enough that we can actually grasp at this level of our evolution, this level of our development, of our cognitive, psychological development. So if they thought that there was the need to have a fifth book, it's because something was missing. Something that was extremely important, was already extremely important at the time of Kardec in the 1850s. And that was missing in the other 4 books of the codification. And as we read and reread the first 4 books, and we think of what is missing from those books, we figure out that what is missing is something extremely basic and almost embarrassing to admit. We don't talk about God. There is no mention to God in the first 4 books of the codification. Someone might interject here at this point and say, wait a second. We have about 1,019 questions in the Spirit's book, the very first book of the codification. And the first 13 questions are exactly about God. That is absolutely true. But what they discuss there, what the book discusses there, is the idea of if the effect is intelligent, the cause must be intelligent as well. So God must be an intelligence or an intelligent source. Then he tells that all the attributes of God, no matter what we think, all its attributes must be to perfection. But all this is very abstract because we don't understand what eternity is. We cannot understand or grasp the concept of infinity, for instance, and we cannot understand what perfection is. So basically, we take one word we don't understand, God, and we say God is perfect, and we substitute for another word we also don't understand. So we need something that is easier to grasp at this point, that is easy to comprehend, to understand. This is what was missing, and this is what Genesis is all about. Genesis, unlike most individuals believe, oh, Genesis is the book of scientific knowledge. Genesis where science, the scientific part of Spiritism is described. No, it is not. Genesis is the book of God. Genesis is the book about God. Out of all the 5 books of the codification, you are going to learn about God in Genesis, not in the other 4 books of the codification. And with this in mind, we now start our journey through the entire book of Genesis. And we are surprised right away, because I just told you Genesis is about the book of, it's a book that was written about God. And when we read the first 2 chapters, we see Kardec mentions nothing about God. Kardec starts talking about first-order revealers, second-order revealers, and third-order revealers. Basically, Kardec is talking about revelations, discoveries, unveiling of secrets, or unveiling of things we did not know, changing our level of ignorance to a level that is not as bad, increasing our knowledge base. We are not talking about God at all. We also see Kardec discussing about something that we find very strange. He talks about relative truths and absolute truth. And we know now that what we know today is all relative. We are always building our knowledge. Things that we thought were correct, were right 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, all that knowledge has been revisited, revised, updated, sometimes completely tossed out and replaced by other things. So what we know are relative truths. We don't know the absolute truth. But a lot of times, we believe that what we know is absolute. And that is very dangerous, because when we behave like that, we start imposing onto others that idea that we have, which is a relative truth. But when we impose it, we try to make it absolute. And this is not a rational idea. It's not a rational faith, because there is no analysis, there is no investigation. Either the individual accepts the way it is given or not. And if not, then sometimes there is a punishment for that. And this is not correct. We need to be aware, even in scientific knowledge. We have a tendency to believe that everything we know in science is already absolute, that it will not change. That is not correct. Everything we know that we are unveiling, whether we unveil as a first order revealers or we pass it on having learned it from somebody else, everything that is revealed today at our level of understanding is actually partial or relative. This is why our knowledge is constantly in an upheaval, is in a constant turmoil. We're constantly changing our ideas, improving upon things, and making things better, upgrading, updating them. They are all relative truths. They are not absolute. After the first few chapters, we have chapters 4 and 5, for instance, where some people say, oh, we should just remove these chapters from the book because there's no point anymore. Should we study them? They're talking, Allan Kardec is referring to the old systems of the world, where, for instance, people were discussing whether it was the sun that moved around the earth or the other way around, the earth moving around the sun. And most individuals that talk, they have a tendency to say, why are these chapters there? They seem incongruous, they seem odd. But actually, Allan Kardec placed these two chapters there as examples of what he just discussed in the first 3 chapters of the book. Because these two chapters are there to show how our knowledge has been growing, has been developing throughout the years, and how important it is for us to continue to investigate, to accept that what we know today is actually a wider and wider set of truths, but they're all relative truths. And that if we stop analyzing, we stop dissecting, we stop comprehending, investigating, then what we run the risk of doing is exactly making these relative truths absolute ones and start imposing them on others, which is exactly what we did in the past. Those who believed that the earth moved around the sun and not the other way around were condemned to die at the stake, in dungeons, were persecuted, had their lives completely turned upside down in horrible ways. And these two chapters represent a way that the spirits had to warn us of what we know today is all a set of relative truths, and that we should be very careful not to make them absolute, not to be adamant about what we know. We have to understand that we are still growing, we are still in progress, under development, and so are all the sets we have, all the sets of information, all the pieces of information that we collect. No matter how intelligent, no matter how hardworking someone is, we are all collecting relative truth at this point. And having said all that, then Allan Kardec goes into what most people say, oh, this is the scientific part of the book. But before I go there, I would like to mention something. Most individuals criticize Genesis by saying the book is outdated, that there's a lot of wrong things in the book, and this and that. And here, I would like to make a small pause and just say a few things. First of all, Genesis has no wrong concepts. When we read Genesis, we have to read Genesis with our mind set in the 1850s. Because the knowledge that is available in Genesis, the scientific knowledge, was state of the art for the 1850s, which, mind you, is before we discovered the subatomic particles. We didn't even have an idea they existed. Electricity and magnetism were all very confusing concepts then, just to give you an idea. So what is there in Genesis is correct for the 1850s. So we cannot say today it is incorrect, because we have to read when the book was written. We have to read Genesis with our minds set to the time when the book was written. The other thing I would like to point out is that if you read Genesis to get scientific knowledge, I believe that you are not taking the correct book. Genesis is not a book about science. You want to know about science, you take a periodical or you take a college textbook. That's where you're going to find science. And if you take the correct one, the correct edition, that's where you're going to find the science that is completely up to date. Not in Genesis, because Genesis was not written as a scientific book. Genesis is a book about God, and as such, it is today as up to date as it was when it was written, when it came out of Allan Kardec's pen. So we have to be very careful how we approach books. Having said all that, now we go into the part of Genesis where Kardec describes the formation of the universe, of the planets. And here, of course, we are going to use the current knowledge we have. We are not going to make a historical approach. We're going to go back to the book and try to understand what Allan Kardec wrote then. Here we update with the content what we know today. And we start with the Big Bang Theory. And here is another point Kardec made in his own way, with his own knowledge. Today we have the Big Bang Theory, and I would like to remind everyone that a theory is a collection of ideas that are there that attempt to explain the observed phenomena from nature. So we scientists, we observe phenomena from nature. We scientists, we human beings observe phenomena, and then we create a set of ideas that have a tendency to explain, that have the role to explain. But we cannot explain everything. So the Big Bang Theory today is one that explains the largest portion of things that we observe. But there are many things we still don't know, we still don't have an answer for. And this is why we have to continue to investigate. This is why we have to continue to analyze, to continue to probe. And this is why, even though we call it a theory, it is a relative truth. And this is very important. It ties us back to the first chapter of the book. It ties us back to the idea of the first order, second order revealer, and so on. No matter what we reveal, no matter what we discover, no matter what we analyze for the first time or the second time and so on, we all have relative truth. And we start now with the Big Bang Theory. And at one particular point, everything we know to exist today was concentrated in this point. At infinite pressure, infinite temperature, very high levels of energy. And this point burst out. At this moment, when it burst out, we have the creation of space as we know it, the creation of time as we know it, the creation of all the laws of physics of the universe that we can measure today as we know it. Questions: how was it possible for everything to be in that little point? We don't know. Why is it that it burst open? We don't know. So even though we do have a theory, we still cannot explain everything. But it's still a valid theory. It helps us take the next step. And this is what is important. We accept the fact that what we know, whatever it is a relative truth. And we move on, collecting another relative truth. And from one rung to another, we climb up the ladder towards the absolute truth. The absolute truth is the last rung on this evolutionary ladder. And this is why we have to take one rung at a time, one relative truth at a time. So the universe is made at the very beginning. And I'm not going to go into many details here. There are much better lectures for that. I just want to mention to you that at the very beginning, we start by creating the subatomic particles. From those, we have the subatomic particles. Then from the subatomic particles, we put together the first three chemical elements, or atoms, if you prefer. Hydrogen, helium, and lithium, but particularly hydrogen and helium. The universe did not, according to this theory, and according to our measurements, because the theory is based on measurements, scientific evidence, the universe did not make anything else besides, at the beginning, at the Big Bang, besides hydrogen, helium, and lithium. But when it spread it all around, it did not spread it evenly. Hydrogen and helium tended to concentrate in very specific pockets, let's put it this way. And these pockets was what we call today nebulae. These are stellar nurseries where stars are born. And if we now go inside one of them, we focus in one of these nebulae, we take one particular nebula, and we go inside, even inside the nebula, we will see that hydrogen, the helium, the lithium, they do not spread out evenly, but also concentrated in certain areas, in certain pockets, because of gravitational fields, because of so many other things. But now, the gravitational fields are making these gases, these atoms, spin around a particular center and concentrating around a particular center. It doesn't matter how small these atoms are, they have mass. If they have mass and now we have a gravitational field, they are going to have weight. So at one particular point, there is so much gas around one particular area that the weight of the gases forces the ones very close to the center to fuse together. This is what we call a nuclear reaction, and in this case, a nuclear fusion reaction. When this happens, we have the birth of a star, like our sun. Our sun is a very simple, very small example of a star. Very small one indeed, compared to many other stars we know of. There are stars that are more than 1 million times bigger than our sun. And our sun is already more than 1 million times, about 1 million times bigger than our planet. Just to put things into perspective. It's very hard for us to conceive of these numbers or to have some grasp of what physically this represents. But just to give you an idea, these stars are like our sun. So we may think, well, if it's a star, it's basically just a chemical furnace. But it's much more than that. Inside, we have a beautiful example of stellar engineering. There is a very delicate balance that is absolutely mesmerizing. Inside, all the way down there, we have a nuclear fusion reaction that is trying to explode the star. It's trying to push the star out, blow it apart, blow it to smithereens. On the outside, the star has all these gases around it, which gives it its shape. But these gases have mass. With the gravitational field, the mass then has weight. And the weight of the star is trying to collapse it in on itself. In other words, implode the star. So because now we have a balance, a very delicate equilibrium between the forces inside from the nuclear reaction trying to blow the star outwardly, and the gases, the weight of the gases trying to implode or blow it inwardly, the star can glow and hold its shape, burning its fuel, glowing, giving us, for instance, in the case of our sun, the warmth and the light. But what happens when the star is burning this fuel, when the star runs out of these elements to burn? Because one point that I want to make right now, I said that the universe created helium, created hydrogen, and created lithium. But my body is a carbon-based life form. We have oxygen, we have nitrogen, we have iron, we have calcium, we have phosphorus. We have so many other atoms that the universe did not create at the moment of the Big Bang or right after. So where do these elements come from? Everything we know today had to come from the Big Bang, but the Big Bang itself did not create them. Well, this is what happens, and this is why I had to take this pathway through the star creation. Because as the star is burning its fuel, it's converting it into, let's say, carbon, one of the very small atoms as well. But it doesn't go much further than that. And eventually, a particular star runs out of its chemical fuel. It runs out of hydrogen, runs out of helium. Now, it has nothing else to burn. But you still have all this excess, all these other atoms on its outside that were converted from the hydrogen and the helium. These atoms also have mass. These atoms also have weight because of the gravitational field. So the star still has that force trying to collapse in on itself, collapse it in on itself. But now we no longer have a fusion reaction in the center to balance that particular force inwardly. So what happens is that the star initially implodes. And as it is imploding, as it is compressing in on itself, it creates massive shock waves, huge levels of energy and pressure that are applied on these atoms on its outside, compressing them, fusing them together into much heavier elements. Gold, silver, mercury, the iron that we have in our bodies, the oxygen that we breathe, the calcium that is in our bones, for instance, the phosphorus, which is also in our bones, in this case in the form of phosphates, and so on. And then the star blows apart. This takes from a microsecond to a millisecond. So as the star is dying, it forms these much larger chemical elements or atoms. And then it explodes, seeding them in every direction possible. These now heavier elements will later, also by gravitational fields, they're going to agglomerate, they're going to be pulled together towards a particular point and create planets or create cold bodies, cold celestial bodies, because these chemical elements are already too heavy to be burned. So they are not going to be like hydrogen and helium. So they're not going to create other stars. They're going to be planets, satellites like our moon, meteors, and so on. And this is how it goes. And at first, a planet is always, it's in its incandescent state because there's still a lot of temperature, a lot of energy there. So even the chemical elements that we know, they are not in the solid state. But eventually, with the passage of millions and billions of years, the planets themselves also cool off and a crust forms. Today, Earth, after 4.5 billion years of existence, Earth is not completely solidified. We live on a very, very thin crust, but inside our planet has molten, liquefied nickel and iron. It's a nickel-iron core that is molten in its liquid state because the temperatures are in the thousands of degrees. But we form now, in a particular scenario, a planet by creating this little crust. From the cooling off, the continuous cooling off, now we have even the other gases around this planet coming down, perhaps in a liquid form like some sort of rain. We create the first weather patterns. Then these weather patterns at first are very tempestuous. We say that these planets are in a telluric state. Everything is in a violent form. All the weather patterns, the volcanoes, everything that is happening on the surface of this planet is not happening as they happen today on Earth. Earth is now a planet that is going towards its middle age, if we can say that. It's calm, content, and it's in a situation where it can now receive life. Planets like this, or he received biological life, if you allow me. These planets we are talking about at the very beginning, they are telluric, they are violent. All these processes it's very difficult for us to see this type of biological form in formation in these planets, not at this moment. Because we are first changing the geological aspect of the planet. But with the passage of millions, if not billions of years, the planets cool off, the weather patterns become less and less violent. Now we are eroding the crust that is solid. We are creating other chemicals, more complex chemicals. Then we move from more complex chemicals to chemicals that can mimic themselves, make copies of themselves. Then chemicals that can aggregate and produce larger associations of other chemicals, and on, until we get to some sort of a protocell. And then from that protocell, we have the biological evolution. That protocell will create the primitive cell, a singular cell. Then from that single cell, we are going to have a a complex aggregation or aggregate of cells, then a multicellular organism, then more and more complex organisms. And this, all from the Big Bang. This is all we know today. Of course, I glossed over many, many important details throughout this discussion, but unfortunately, each little step in it would be a lecture of its own. It's just to give us an idea how we had, all the way from the Big Bang, how our knowledge has evolved. Today, in 2015, how much we know. But if I could have stopped at each one of these points, I could very easily put together 10, maybe 20 questions that we still have unanswered. And this is why we have to continue to investigate. But all this is in the material side of the creation. We now ask ourselves, what happens on the spiritual side? And what we gather from the spiritual realm, and even from our own researches in Spiritism, is that we can divide the creation into two avenues, or into two sides. I must warn everyone here at this point that this division is purely didactic. It's just about how to better understand a very complex situation. We divide it ourselves. It's not that the division is real. We divide it in order to approach it better. And we say, for instance, that the side that is about the sentience, the side that is about the spirit, the spiritual side, comes from the spiritual principle, the intelligent principle. That's the spiritual side of the creation. Everything else that is non-spiritual comes from the other side, which is the universal cosmic fluid. Different manifestations of the universal cosmic fluid will give rise to matter, antimatter, dark matter, energy, dark energy, everything that is not spiritual. And that's how we divide it. And it's a very positive division. It's a very good way of categorizing the creation to allow us to pursue our inquiries, to pursue our analysis, our investigations. That is what is important. Not exactly whether it's true or not. It is a didactic approach. And this is where its merit lies. But we have talked a lot about the universal cosmic fluid side of it, the UCF, because we've talked about the Big Bang, the material formation of the universe. So now let's talk about a little bit with respect to the spiritual side. We are not put together as a spirit right away. We are a spirit in progress, a spirit to be, and we call that a monad. All of us started our journey as a monad. How? I don't know. Another point we should investigate, showing to us that everything we know today, even if it's correct, is still a relative truth, that there's a lot more out there, much more than we actually realize. As a monad, at first, we don't have a learning process per se. Not a learning process in the strict sense, because we don't have any cognitive abilities. Today, we can say a baby learns when it interacts with parents, with a toy, or even with the environment. Because there is a cognitive process at work, but not at the monad level. As we are put together as monads, all we do is collect information initially. There is no choice either, because we cannot think at this point. We are collecting information. So monads associate themselves with portions of the universal cosmic fluid, and this association allows the monads to collect information. And at this point here, some individuals might say as a joke, I hope it says as a joke, that, oh, then I can trace all the bad things that I do to the time when I was a monad, because instead of taking path A, B, C, D, I took Z, X, A, T. That's actually not true, because as a monad, the order in which we experience this information is irrelevant. It's like this. Imagine that I ask you to pick up some to pick up fruit, and each one of you has a bag. And one individual picks up a pineapple first, then an apple, and then a pear. And the other one starts with the pear, then the apple, and then the pineapple. In the end, if I ask you to show me what you have in your fruit baskets or in your sack, you're going to have the same pieces of fruit. You're not going to have anything different. Everybody will have the exact same thing. But the order in which you collect them, you pick them up, may be different. This is the situation with the monads. Because at this point, there is very little interaction in the sense of processing the information. We are only gathering information. And as monads, we are gathering information. And for that, we need to associate ourselves to parts of the universal cosmic fluid. This is why we are associated to atoms. Then we are associated to molecules. Then we associated ourselves to chemical aggregates, larger complexes of molecules or atoms, whatever they are, and on and on. More information we need, the better the tools we have to collect the information. But we do not process that information. Eventually, from the gathering of information, we will gather enough that now we can start doing some, let's say, statistical analysis, for lack of a better word. Now I may collect a piece of information that I realize I already have. So now I can say, well, I have twice this type of information, or 3 times that type of information, and on and on and on. So I can start saying, for instance, I have collected more of this or more of that. I am still collecting information. But from this gathering, from this statistical process, this inherently statistical process, we can now devise a means to compare what we are collecting with what we already have. And in that sense, we have the birth, the incipience of the very first primordial, primitive form of sensorial input. We can now, for instance, go after a particular stimulus, either go away from it or in its direction. So we can go after food, for instance. So imagine ourselves as a very primitive cell trying to go after a particular, attempting to go after a particular form of nourishment. That requires a sensorial input. That is at the level of the monad. The monad is learning that. Now we can go and we can move ourselves towards higher and higher, let's say, concentration of that stimulus that we are feeling, because now we have associated that with more nourishment. There is no thinking process. There is no thinking such as this is better than the other. There's no comparison in that sense. The comparison here is what I am collecting with what I already have. But this is the first step. And from this, we are going to use better and better biological tools, now always associated to these biological tools, to improve our ability to collect and now begin to process the information that we collect. As a monad, we keep going, and eventually we are going to be able to have instinct, the reaction towards the environmental stimuli. So now, not only we compare, but we can actually produce an action based on what we collect, based on what we gather. Birth of instinct. It's still a reaction. It's very reflexive. There is very little cognitive processing there, if any. So we don't talk about a spirit at this level. We're still at the level of the monad. And with the instinct, eventually we'll be able to figure out likelihoods. What does that mean? Now, imagine that I don't have to collect enough information. I can actually predict. I actually don't like the word predict very much. I would say we can have an association, a thinking process. We can try to hypothesize what may happen. I'll give you an example. It's a cold season right now. So we know it's cold outside, and most people are wearing coats. So I watch the door, and I see a person coming in having a coat. Another person coming in dressed with a coat, a third and a fourth and so on. So then I tell myself, it's cold outside. When it's cold, we need a coat, we need a jacket. So it is very likely that the next individual that comes in will be wearing a coat. Now, that does not tell me that I'm 100% sure is going to happen. I have no assurance, no guarantees. All I can say is that I can use the information I have been gathering to create an expectation about a future event that has not happened yet. I have not had the stimulus from the environment. But it may be completely wrong. Perhaps the next person that comes in is a member of the Polar Bear Club and is completely comfortable in short sleeves, even though 99 out of 100 people here are wearing coats. So the idea here is not whether we are going to be correct or not. The idea here is that we reach a certain point in our lives as monads that now we can not only process information that we collect at the instinctive level, but we can create likelihoods, probabilities. When we have this stage, we inaugurate a different era for ourselves. This is the time when we are capable of devising choices, not before. And this is the birth of free will. So some of you might be thinking right now, because I can see in some of the faces here, wait a second, I've read that we are born with free will and the principle of intelligence. The books never said that. The books said that the spirit, not the monad, the spirit has free will and the beginnings, the primordial intelligence. That is true, because it's only now when we reach this stage that we are called spirits. Until then, until this point, we are called monads. The monad does not have free will. There is no point in giving free will to a monad because the monad can't even process the information at first. If you can't process the information, where is your responsibility? And you don't even know what to figure out. A choice is not something that the environment gives to you. A choice is what we create based on the stimuli we collect from the environment. When I say I have a choice, is because I have analyzed situation A and I have analyzed situation B. I have received the stimuli from situation A. I have received the stimuli from situation B. I compare one with another. The choice is in me. It's not the environment. The environment just have paths. Like the first monads had different paths to take, and they were collecting the information that was right in front of them. But now when I collect the information or I recall stimuli from past experiences and I compare them, I create choices. And then based on the comparison, I say I'll take choice A or choice B and so on. And then I have to own up to the choices I take, the choices I make. So now I have responsibility. So now it makes sense to have free will. Free will is our ability to create choices and follow one of them. This is free will. This is free will because we create them. And it's because we create them that we have to be responsible for whatever outcome they may lead us to. And it's at this point that the monad becomes a spirit. And it's at this point, now, from this point on, that the monad needs a very complex biological tool to keep moving forward, to keep improving, developing. It's at this point that we associate ourselves with the human body, with a human mind. Now, this is the point where we move away from the animals, away from the plants. We have been associating ourselves from the very first atom all the way to the last plant, last animal. Now we ingress, we start our journey in the human body form. One thing that is important to say is that we have a tendency to believe that we go to bed one night as monad and we wake up the next day as spirit. Of course, it's not like that. It's a process. And think about it. We've been on this planet as monads at least for 2.5 billion years, out of, or 2.6 billion years, out of 4.5 billion years that Earth has been around. So it's been happening very slowly. It's a gradual process. We're not talking about going to bed as monad and waking up as a spirit. It's very important. But when we settled in the human form, we call it the spirit. This is the birth of free will. It's easier for us when we're discussing to say it as a point in time. But I want to impart upon all of you, I want to stress, to emphasize that it's not a real point in time, but actually a very long process. And it's from this point on, in the human form, associated to the human form, I don't like the word in this particular, associated to the human form, that the spirit can now create its cognitive abilities, develop its cognitive abilities, which will allow that spirit, I will say spirit from now on, no longer monad, to allow this spirit to devise a construct of God. Because the truth is, if everything we know is based on relative truths, each and every one here has a core of experiences that is the same, basically, but with slight variations. We have all done the same thing in this huge journey towards our plenitude, towards our evolution, towards our perfection. So the trip is the avenue to that is very wide. We're all in it, but there are slight subtleties. So these are variations on a theme, but the same thing is for everybody. But because we have all a different construct, different relative truths, we are also going to build slight variations on the construct of God. Which brings us to a very interesting point. Actually, two of them. The first one is that each and every one here believes in a different God. Because each and every one here has a different construct of what divinity, what divine providence, what the creator of all things actually represents. And there is nothing I can do to convince you of my God, unless I become disrespectful, unless I try to impose my views. But if I have to respect you, if I have to respect your relative truths, like you respect mine, we are going to have the same ideas. Because like I said, the theme is the same, but there are variations on a theme. Hence, there are variations on the construct of God that we all believe in. And this is why it's important for us to grasp. The other thing that is very important is that a lot of individuals, I said, mention, oh, Genesis is a scientific book of the codification. No, it's not. I told you that Genesis is the book that is about God, the construct of God, the concept of God, the idea of God, which is slightly different in every one of us. But the other thing that I find absolutely amazing is that to be able to understand God, we have to go through the relative truths that we all collect. The relative truths that we collect go through a process of investigation, of analysis, of the environment around us. And the only way for us to investigate, to analyze, is to start with the physical universe. It's the easiest way. Because if I come here and I talk about an abstract construct of God, an abstract concept of God, you might just listen, but you will not get, because that abstraction only exists in my mind. It's my creation, my construct. I cannot give it to you. You cannot feel it. You cannot experience it. You can only listen to it. And we grow, we create this construct of God by experiencing the physical universe. So it is science. It is the analysis of our environment, whether we want to call it science or not, that leads us to the construct of God, that allows us not only to create one, but to improve upon it. Without it, we will not be able to put it together in the first place. We can take somebody else's, but we will never have faith because we don't understand what the construct represents, what it stands for. We need to experience life for ourselves to be able to create a construct that fulfills our needs and to keep improving upon it. And to keep improving upon it, we have to keep on investigating, questioning, debating, whatever it takes, but always analyzing. And I find this amazing. Now you see that I turned everything around. Probably I turned everything upside down. I took everything inside out. Because you thought I was going to talk about science. You thought that I was going to say to you that this is science and this is religion. No. And you see how the two combine to be able to get a better cognitive process and create a better construct of God. I need the scientific evidence. I need that part. They go together. Without it, I cannot have a rational construct of God. And without a rational construct of God, one I create from my experiences, I cannot have a rational faith. And this is why I call this lecture Genesis, Masterpiece of Rational Faith. Because it is showing to us the path for each and every one here to build its own, her own construct of God. And this is what the book is about. And Kardec continues. Kardec shows us, talks about the origin of the universe, which is the part of the universal cosmic fluid, talks about the Mosaic Genesis and the biological Genesis, and keeps going on further and further. And then it seems a little odd. It almost feels like Kardec changes gears completely because talking about the miracles of the gospel. And you might say, why is he going back to religion? He's not going back to religion. He's still on the same topic. It's just that we have a tendency just to get the first thing that comes to our sight. But we have to go a little further. We have to read between the lines. Why is Kardec now talking about miracles? Because what Kardec wants to tell us at this point is the following. If we are at this level of evolution, we have this level of understanding, this level of relative truth, a person above us will see the same natural phenomenon with different eyes. Because I am at this level, there will be certain natural phenomena I will not be able to find an explanation right now. I may see them as miraculous, as I may see them as derogating the natural laws. And if I derogate the natural laws or something does, then God cannot be perfect. But then a person up here, and I'm not talking about high order spirits, just a little higher level, a little further in terms of knowing relative truth. This individual here, this spirit, will see the same natural phenomenon with different eyes and will know the answer for it and will think that it's just a common fact. So the idea of a miracle is inexistent in this case, because a miracle today is simply that which we cannot explain with the relative truth that we have accumulated so far. But it's telling us that if we continue to investigate, to probe the theme of this evening, We one day collect enough relative truth that will allow us to explain that phenomenon. And by explaining that phenomenon, it will be part of common occurrences in nature, in the universe. We will not see them as miraculous anymore. And this is what we are talking about in this particular 2 chapters at the very end of the book already. Finally, we reach one of the last chapters, the part when we talk about the predictions, when we talk about the predictions and also the future of our planet. Let me address the predictions first. In the same way we talked about miracles, when we talk about predictions, we are not talking about the capability that a spirit has of being 100% correct. What we are saying is this: a spirit at this level, for instance, has only a certain level of knowledge, a certain level of relative truth. A spirit a little bit above the first one will have higher knowledge or more knowledge and more relative truth. So for the same phenomenon, when this spirit tries to create an outcome, not something that has already happened, but as something that might happen in the near future, distant future, it doesn't matter, it's an outcome, this spirit will create a particular likelihood, a probability that the event will happen or will not happen, or will happen this way or that way. This one, knowing a little further, might have a different outcome, a different likelihood, a different probability. But neither one will be able to say with 100% assurance or guarantee that it will happen the way they are, let's say, predicting. They are expecting it to happen. Not even the angelical beings are capable of giving us 100% assurance, 100% guarantee. They are the closest ones that we understand today to God. But only God, only perfection, whatever perfection is, because we can't create a construct of perfection simply because we only have relative truths. We don't have the absolute one. Only what is absolute can give us an absolute view of things, an absolute outcome. So, in the same way that the previous chapters demystified the idea of miracles, now we are putting to the ground all the ideas about predictions. And what we are saying is that the more we know, the more we investigate, the better our outcomes are going to be, the likelihoods, the probabilities of the things that are to happen. But that we will never be able, not at this stage, not while we are still evolving, not while we are still progressing, will not be able to give 100% certainty for our predictions. And with that, we move on to the last chapter, which is the chapter that talks about the changes that the planet is undergoing at the moment. First thing we have to understand is that these changes, much like the monad did not go to bed one day as monad and woke up as a spirit, Earth is not going to bed one day as a planet of expiation or atonement and waking up the next day as a planet of regeneration. This is something that has been happening for the past 200 years. It started with the Industrial Revolution. And it will take another 100, maybe 200, I don't know how long it's going to take. I can pinpoint roughly when it started. But it's also a gradual process. We are changing the planet. Notice, it's not the planet that is changing. We are changing. And because we change, we say, oh, Earth is improving. Earth is not improving. The spirits coming to Earth are improving. The spirits incarnating, surrounding Earth are improving. Therefore, we can say, as an analogy, that it's the Earth is improving, but it's not the planet itself. We are the ones building the planet, making it better. And in that sense, I wanted to discuss briefly what our level, what our responsibilities are in this case. Because if we are the ones who have to change, then it's not a question of having to change everyone on the planet. Right now, all we have to do is change how many people, is to change the ratio between those who have an intention to do good and those who have no intentions to do good. So right now, we're still kind of a 50-50, if not still a little bit more on those who do not have any intentions to do good. But as we improve upon ourselves, as we try harder and harder, notice that I'm not saying that we have to become saints. We don't have to become good individuals overnight. What I'm saying is we have to change the number of individuals who have an intention to do good. That's all it needs. That is all it takes. Once we change and now we have more individuals with intentions towards goodness, towards good, towards progress, then the planet will be classified as a planet of regeneration. We're almost there. And why is it that I say that was right after the Industrial Revolution? Because the Industrial Revolution allowed us to work a little more. Each and every individual was given the opportunity to start working on their own construct of God. They were given this opportunity only because we allowed, the machines allowed us to detach ourselves more and more from very repetitive labor. And now we can think more. We can develop our other cognitive abilities, our artistic abilities, our sensitivities. This is why it was the Industrial Revolution, some sort of a point in time, if you would like to have it, when this whole process started. But it's very important for us to understand it's still a gradual process. Like I said, the planet is not going to go to bed one night or one cycle around the sun as a planet of expiation or atonement, and then come out the next cycle a planet of regeneration. We are moving slowly, but we are moving. One last thing about the chapter is a lot of individuals tell me that oh, it's so beautiful. The last chapter is a message of hope. Allan Kardec is telling us that our planet is going to change. If you read, and this is your idea, I would suggest very strongly that you go back and read it again, because you got nothing out of that chapter, out of chapter 18. Kardec does not tell us anything about hope. Kardec does not tell us anything that we are one day going to be a planet of regeneration. It's not that. It is not a question of if. It's a question of when. When we decide to improve ourselves, when we decide to have better intentions toward goodness, when we decide to put the effort to change ourselves, Earth will be a planet of regeneration. It's not if. So it's not hope. Kardec is telling us, the spiritual benefactors are telling us, it's up to you. When you decide, you make it. No one is going to do it for you. People talk about the end of the world, or ascendance this way or that way, or this date or that date. This has no meaning. The change is in us. If we don't put the effort to change, nothing will change. Because it's not the planet, as I said initially, that will change. We are the ones who might or might not change. If we do, then the planet will reflect the change within each and every one of us. Finally, I just want to mention about one chapter that I skipped. I believe it's chapter 3, where Kardec says things about good and bad. We don't use the word evil. And we see that when we build this construct of God, there is no such a correct construct or an incorrect construct, because this is the construct that each and every one creates based on their experiences. We are not talking about constructs that are imposed, because like I said, those are not constructs. Those are ideas that are imposed, and people either accept or not. When we speak of a construct, that's a psychological, that is a cognitive process that we have inside each and every one of us, and we develop it. It's not imposed. So in that sense, we don't talk about a good construct or a bad construct. It's my construct, your construct, hers, his, theirs, and so on. And we all vary slightly on the same thing. When we say good and bad, we have to understand that the idea of good, the idea of bad, is always comparative. And is also a social idea. Think of it this way. If you are placed in a complete deserted place, if you're located, someone takes you to that place, and now you're alone, no other human being around, no communication. Whatever you do, is it good or bad? How can you tell? There is no comparison. There is no other reference or external reference to compare it to. Oh, but I can compare with my past experiences. How? Even your past experiences were done collectively, socially. So the idea of good and bad is an idea of a social gathering. We get this idea as members of a society, whatever this society is. So we need to understand, especially when we talk about the construct of God, that our journey is individual. No one can take our journey for us. Each and every one here has to walk with their own legs towards that plenitude, towards that perfection. But when we learn, in the process, we have to learn. We have to gather, collect, analyze the relative truth. When we learn, we learn as a group. We learn as a society. The path, the travel is individual. But the learning process is as a society. This is why we have a lot of difficulties to extricate the idea of good and bad when we talk about the construct of God. To learn to create the construct, we do have a life in society with good and bad comparisons, better, worse, and so on. But in the end, as we build that construct based on the relative truth that we have been amassing from the moment we're put together as monads, how, when, I don't know. Only God truly knows that. But we have been putting all that information together from that very moment. The construct of God that we create is ours. It's not good, it's not bad. It is simply mine, yours, his, hers, theirs, and so on. This is what I had to show you about the book of Genesis. The fifth and last book of the Spiritist Codification of the Spiritist doctrine. A masterpiece of rational faith. Because rational comes from our own analysis of things. It is rational because it's from within us, from what we know, from what we trust, from the experiences we have been acquiring. Because it is our construct. And once it is our construct, there is nothing to say that is the wrong one. Because it's our experiences. So from the construct of God in each and every one of us, we develop our individual faith, which is stronger or weaker, depending on how good, in the sense of how strong, or weak the construct of God is. How we feel about that construct. The better we feel about it, not in comparison to other individuals, the more rational that faith will be. The more we investigate, the more we analyze, the more we probe, the more we see the beauty in the universe. Think of it this way. Today, we understand that when I see the sun, that photon of light has to be produced inside of the star. That photon of light bounces around inside of the star, and it takes over 1,000 years. 1,000 years to get outside of the sun. Once it gets free from the gravitational field, it has a trip of a little over 8.5 minutes to reach the Earth. Once it reaches the Earth, it impinges on my eye, on this sensorial organ I have. It's processed in my brain, and then I can say, there it is, the sun. When we look at a flower, and we see the disposition of the petals, and we see that the angle from one petal to another allows all of them to be exposed to the same amount of light when there is light. We begin to see beyond just the beauty of the flower. We see the beauty of its construction. We look at a honeycomb and we see the angles that are used to put it together. So many other things. Everything we look at today with our scientific knowledge unravels beauties, uncovers, unveils beauties we did not know existed 50, 100, 1,000 years ago. And imagine what we will know in 50, in 100 years. It is in experiencing the universe that we improve our construct of God. The construct is created, maintained, and updated by our eagerness to investigate, and to investigate the physical universe. It is from the physical that we can abstract, not the other way around. So I urge you all to experience more, to investigate more, to debate more, to analyze more, because in that sense you will be building a better construct of our Creator, and from that you will have a much stronger faith, because it will be coming from within you, not from what someone has told you or from a book or anything else. Genesis, ladies and gentlemen, a masterpiece of rational faith. Thank you very much.